This is Paul Burnett interviewing Dr. Tom Falkie, for the Mining and Materials Research Project of the Business Series of the Oral History Program at the University of California, Berkeley. And we're here at the Hyatt Regency Hotel in Denver, Colorado. And it's March 16th, February, there we go, February 16th, 2015. Can you talk a little bit about shifting patterns of demand for coal products in the United States and how you adapted to that? Because presumably big steel is winding down during your tenure at Berwyn. So there's the mini mills and they're using their scrap steels. They're not using the coal companies as much. How did you adjust to those kinds of changes during the...
Yeah. Well, one thing you did was you try to export some more to coke plants overseas of other people, and another thing is you had to make sure you had the high quality stuff, which we happen to have in the metallurgical part of it, and it was tough when the steel business started to go down the tubes, and it definitely had an effect on the mining and throughout the whole of Appalachia. But we exported a lot of stuff, and we did not expand as fast as we would like to have if the the steel business had been going strong, and in fact had to shut down some mines.
Right. Who were the big customers worldwide for the coal industry in the United States? And this...
Yeah, well, we used to ship through let's call them consortium to we used to ship to Germany and places like that, Luxembourg and places overseas that had different steel mills.
And some developing countries as well that had steel operations, or did they get their coal from other clients?
No, they got some of their coal from the U.S. But the way it was done is we were not that large a producer. We were not that large, so we used to sell through maybe a broker or a company that was putting together a package to sell, say, to France or somewhere of. Well, I was over in France trying to sell coal over there and over in Finland and so forth, at places like that.
And you also alluded to changing demand for home heating and that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Did that affect
Big time.
things? So what was that transition like, and how did that play out?
A lot of that happened even before we got there. There's slowdown in use of coal in houses, and when they started to convert to natural gas and oil and so forth. And that had a big effect on the coal business. And I don't know what it is now, but there's not that much coal burned in houses these days, even up in the anthracite industry. I mean, we always burned, and my mother and dad's house we were coal.
Right.
And I'm sure the people that bought that house eventually are not using coal, they're using oil.
Right.
And I'd be willing to bet you have to really look hard to find a number of houses that are burning coal these days in the coal region. It's just not happening because first of all, it's cheaper to use natural gas, and providing you have the supply source, the pipelines and so forth, and oil.
And that certainly does seem to be the policy emphasis today, is to there's obviously this great natural gas boom, and there's this effort to switch to cleaner burning. Something like, I don't know, is it 50% of the electricity in the United States comes from coal-fired plants? Is that right?
And it's been going down. It's been going down each year.
What was it roughly speaking, what was it when you started in the industry? Like in the 60s, let's say.
I'm going to say somewhere 65, 70%, maybe even a little higher. I don't remember the numbers, but it was pretty high.
Right. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to adjust to, I suppose, for
Yeah. Yeah.
minerals industries, but coal mining in particular. Um, and so during your time at Berwyn, there's this effort to diversify, and that's not the areas that you were dealing with. You were dealing with coal mining and sales, land companies, rail car and railroad repair services, oil and gas,
Yeah.
and environmental waste and disposal. Can you talk about that segment of it, or was that not that significant?
Yeah. There was a lot of pressure on what do you do with these old coal banks that you had. So obviously we had to do something about some of them and had to put them in the proper condition where they were not exposed and not causing the pollution that they were.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of work going on in terms of correcting these coal waste areas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Still is, for example,
Right.
I think.
Right.
And so, we obviously being in the business since the 1880s had some things that had to be corrected, and there was a lot of that going on.
Are there some coal Superfund sites?
Well, I think there are, yeah. There are.
Yeah. So there's a lot of environmental remediation
Not
going on.
not that many, because you can if you do it right, you can correct those problems. You can stop the water from running away, or stop the water from going into the ground, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Say it in a simple way. You can,
Right.
you have to spend some money to do it, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And oil and gas becomes part of Berwyn. It wasn't before. It was added in to the mix.
Well, there was increased interest in drilling for gas and oil on our property, and we wanted to be involved, so we took interest in some of the wells that were there.
Mm.
Now, I have to say, looking forward towards the end of my career there, this Marcellus shale thing, which you've heard about,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
became the hot thing in Pennsylvania, because Marcellus shale goes across the top of the state and down the western part of the state,
Mm-hmm.
and it's been a real boom for Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
in terms of employment and so forth in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually had a company come in there, Atlas Resources, and no, it wasn't Atlas, it was can't think of the name of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Came in and wanted to drill a couple wells on our property
Mm-hmm.
out in central Pennsylvania, and we made a deal with them, and unfortunately it was right on the edge of Marcellus, so it didn't work for us.
All right.
So, but we did have other oil wells and gas wells on the property.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. During getting closer to the end of your time, there's a couple of you're also active in the industry, not just at this company, but you've been on boards of directors of companies, and near the end of your time at Berwyn, you went back to Penn State to be part of this Global Business Advisory Committee in 2000 to 2002. Can you talk a little bit about that kind of work?
Yeah, well, that didn't work the way I thought it was going to work, but it was to advise the university on how to deal with what was going on in the global business environment.
Mm-hmm.
University was going through deans and getting new deans and all that, and they wanted some industrial advice. What's happening, what's going to happen in the businesses.
Mm-hmm. And there were representatives from all the different industries that were part of
Yeah,
this?
like the oil and coal and so forth, steel,
Mm-hmm.
which was all in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences.
Mm-hmm.
All these curricula were in the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And we were very active, or I was very active with a lot of stuff, that fundraising and everything else, and for the college.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it didn't work out the way you
No,
thought it would?
well, it just didn't have enough momentum, I guess.
Right. And it only lasted a couple of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in 2001, you were part of a National Research Council workshop on energy.
Yeah, well, I was a member of the National Academy of Engineering,
Mhm.
and a National Research Council is kind of related.
Right.
So I got involved in a lot of stuff down there for a while, different committees. In fact, I was on the board of the National Academy of Engineering,
Mm-hmm.
and that was one of the projects that they had. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And the National Science Foundation, you were on the board of Mineral and Energy Resources
Yes.
as well. Yeah. So in other words, during the time that you were at Berwind, you maintained an interest in the big picture academic
Absolutely.
and scientific and engineering challenges and research challenges that we're facing facing those disciplines. And that was something you were very interested in. What were some of the challenges that you were interested in and that you saw when you were working at the NRC and for the NSF board? What was being discussed at the end of the 90s in terms of energy, mineral resources?
Well, there was a lot of stuff. Of course, one of my motivations was to help keep the money going in the right direction from wherever it could come from in the federal government. But there was a lot of stuff going on coal conversion,
Mm-hmm.
and on the metal side, there was a lot of interest on what are you going to do when copper grades go down, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going? All these kinds of problems, and the federal government was constantly having these committees and so forth to write reports about so and so. We're going to be in big trouble if we don't do something about doing the coppers and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like I had to keep active, and I got on the board of directors of a couple of companies, and I just felt like I had to stay active because of my background with the bureau and
Right.
and the fact that I've been active forever, really, SME and AIME and so forth.
And that's and some of those conversations presumably also, I mean, SME is interested in the overall health of the industry and in the health of the professional bodies.
That's right.
That you want to maintain that there's going to be to keep abreast of the changes in technology and the changes in research. So it's an interface of researchers and industry as well.
Right.
And so, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of SME and AIME, because you were at the board of trustees for AIME from 76 to 79 and then 84 to 80.
Well, even before that, what happened was that I don't know if you're aware, but the AIME was the original outfit. It was American Institute of Mining, Metallurgical, and Petroleum Engineers. Mm-hmm. And at one point, it broke up into four societies: the Metallurgical Society, the Petroleum Engineering, the
Iron and Steel.
SME, and the Iron and Steel. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of involved at the time when this breakup was happening, and it involved in the governance of both of those, SME and AIME. I became president of AIME, and it was slowly going to the point where AIME really became a kind of how can you describe it? It was just a top organization.
Like an umbrella organization.
Or umbrella, which didn't really have a lot of, it had some money,
Yeah.
which all the other organizations were interested in.
Right.
But it didn't really have a lot of active stuff going on. And no more meetings, no more. They still have a board and so forth. But that whole evolutionary process occurred at that time. Time from when AIME was AIME till you had the 4 societies, and then there was very active AIME to the time when there is not a very active AIME. But the 4 societies are very, very active. And so there was a lot of discussion and arguing and so forth about how it should be done, and eventually it became what it is today. And I happened to be president of SME in 1984, and then president of AIME in 1988. And this was right in the middle of all this, so it was an interesting time. Took a lot of time.
And was that a healthy for the industries? Was that a healthy transition? Was that a good idea to decentralize?
Probably. I don't know what to call it healthy, but probably okay.
Yeah.
In the long run. Yeah.
Because I keep thinking about the dissolution of the Bureau of Mines, and I wonder is there everything seems to be a bit more decentralized now, and there's a lack of unity of voice, perhaps, from...
There's a lack of unity of voice, no question about that.
Yeah.
In terms of politically and in terms of technology. And for example, some of the stuff, although it's being kind of converting in different directions, that's in the Metallurgical Society is stuff that people in SME are still interested in. Petroleum guys kind of do their own thing, and the iron and steel guys do their own things. You could make an argument that the technology is different, and it is, but you could also, I think, make an argument that some of the stuff overlaps, and not only from a technical standpoint, but from a policy standpoint.
Sure.
We mentioned Marcellus Shale and so forth like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're sharing common problems,
Yeah.
common policy and political problems.
Yeah.
And so there is that. Yeah. Absolutely.
For example, I made a couple of notes.
Sure.
Not too many. I mentioned the cleaning plant situation, but we had a waste to oil pilot plant in Oregon. The Bureau of Mines had one back in the 70s and 60s and 80s, and we were doing research on what we call micellar polymer flooding, which was kind of like fracking. You were flooding wells with this polymer to make it easier to drill and so forth. We were involved in helium at the Bureau of Mines. Extracted helium and stored it, and actually that was kind of like a commercial operation. And they were using this, getting back to the micellar polymer stuff, they were using that for what we call tertiary recovery, going into old oil wells,
Right.
and pumping this stuff in and making more of the oil loose so that you could recover it,
Right.
which is basically what's happening now in the Marcellus and some of these other areas.
Yeah, it's interesting. There do seem to be.
They're ahead of the Bureau was ahead of its time in many areas, and that's one of them.
Yeah, it seems that there are kind of precursors. Fracking didn't come out of nowhere.
No.
There are antecedent practices. I spoke with Roshan Bapu about in situ leaching, which seems to be, and there were different kinds of procedures for injecting chemicals in and pumping out And for him, it was an environmentally friendly practice, because
Yeah.
you can mine uranium over farmers' fields using
Yeah.
this technique and this technology.
And
So
the Bureau was doing some of that stuff too.
he absolutely is. He really lamented the dissolution of the Bureau. He felt it was such a resource for researchers and for the industry, and really lamented that came to an end. So there was a lot of innovative work that was being done there, but also presumably the innovation doesn't stop just because the state is no longer involved. But you've said that the government has been less supportive in funding different kinds of research into energy or resource extraction and resource processing. What about the claims of, let's say, the Obama administration that there is this funding of alternative energy work? Has any of that money come into existing industries to make them more efficient? Has there been any? Has the mining industry been able to tap any of those resources?
Not that I'm aware of. If so, it's on a very small basis. And basically, what what has been done in Washington by this administration is they're in effect subsidizing the solar and the this
wind,
type of stuff, the wind,
renewable sources,
and someday it may become competitive with other energy sources, but it sure isn't today. And the question is, how do you want to subsidize or don't you want to subsidize? And that's kind of a major policy decision that has to be made. They had this big conversion project planned down in, where was it, in Alabama, converting coal to gas, and it was a multi-billion-dollar project, and they had, the coal business was behind it, the states down there were behind it, and it was appropriated, I believe it was appropriated by the Congress, and all of a sudden it was canceled because the administration did not want to do anything related to coal. So it's it's political, and it's I don't know what's going to happen from this point on, but there are ways to burn coal efficiently, or burn coal more cleanly. But it's going to take some work to find out exactly how to perfect the processes. And the question is, should the federal government spend the money like they were going to do down in, was it Alabama, I guess, or not?
Right. And well, it seems that the effort is, the comparison is to the sticking point for the administration seems to be that I don't know, what is it, 63% of the coal plants in the United States are 40 years old and older. And so there needs to be this, it's a question of replacing plants with new plants.
Either update them or replace them.
Right. But doesn't that require some incentivization, like some tax credit, presumably?
Well, in my opinion, that would be extremely wise and helpful. And but it's not happening to the extent that it should be. And as we mentioned before, they are shutting down a lot of these coal-fired power plants, and some of them will never start up, even with the if the incentives come. Some of them could, and I don't know what's going to happen.
So permitting for new, surveying, permitting for new plants is tough. You'd have to show that you're 30% more efficient than the existing plants. And permitting for new coal mines is, well, I guess it's not so much a question of new coal mines because the coal mines exist.
They exist, and you can get permits for new coal mines, but you got to go through the rigors of doing it, the rigors and the time of doing it. You can get permits under certain circumstances.
Right. One of the recent projects that got the green light in, and this is not coal, this is copper, but in Arizona, I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically Senator McCain made this case that it was strategic.
Yeah.
And so I think there are, so I wanted to ask you about that as well, because in addition to the environmental efficiency or arguments and or impetus incentives behind the policies, there's also a concern for energy independence, and that's something that is a bit of a no-brainer for the coal. Right?
Yeah.
It's something like at current rates of production, the United States has something like 300 years of coal production. Is that right?
I'm sure. Yeah, 300
at least.
Well, look at what happened with this so-called fracking. We're now one of the largest oil producers in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Get back to the coal and the minerals in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But with what's being produced up in the Dakotas, plus the Texas, plus the Marcellus, and are actually in a position now where we can export, if we are allowed to, we can export oil, but we cannot export oil. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. And you can some of the products,
talk about that a little bit.
Some of the products you can do it, but you cannot export oil.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have this oil pipeline from Canada, and it's being fought. I haven't read the papers in the last few. I don't know what's happened, but that was passed in the Congress.
Yeah, right.
And what they were going to do is to bring that oil down and process it down in Louisiana and so forth. And a lot of it would be exported. So people saying, well, why are you doing that? Well, some of it would stay here, but would they saying, well, it's providing employment, building the pipeline, processing the pipeline, processing plants down there, or employing people and capital and so forth. And so you have this argument also that some of the people in the oil industry are saying is, let us export it, let's make money, and we'll keep these people in Texas and North Dakota and Pennsylvania and Ohio and all at working. So that's kind of the general argument that's going on now. Now, so far as minerals are concerned, there's always been this questions of strategic minerals.
Right.
You got to watch what the Russian. You got to know where it's coming from, and some of the minerals that we use are totally imported, and you get it. What was that situation actually occurred maybe even before I got to the Bureau of Mines, where there was a problem with tin, and the tin prices went up 10 or 20 times because the Russians and some others were really controlling the production. So that would be what we might call a strategic mineral in a sense.
Right. I know that in the case of the Vietnam War, one of the huge concerns, the whole domino argument in Southeast Asia was that if they go down to this and are able to cut off the Straits of Malacca, then the United States will lose its access to tin.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the claims. So that minerals are extremely political, and in that sense.
But there's a lot of the rare, so-called rare minerals too.
Yeah.
That we don't produce or don't have enough of, that and are needed in your electronic stuff and everything else that could cause problems. If somebody really wanted to cause problems, they'd be dumb to do so, because but you never could tell what the hell the Russians are going to do anyway. So,
Well, I spoke with Alex King of the Critical Materials Institute in Ames, Iowa, and so they've now permitted. They've got the green light for Mountain Pass. So Mountain Pass in California is opening,
yeah,
and they'll be able to supply a tremendous amount of rare earth elements for the United States. But that's a case again where you can argue that the minerals industry can say that this is a special case that requires support in terms of at least not interdiction from the government. Yeah. And so there's a new copper mine that got approved that's going to provide something like 40% of the United States needs in copper for the next 40 years or so.
Yeah. Not too worried about copper because a lot of it's coming from South America. I guess it depends on it.
It depends on the commodity.
Could change too, yeah.
Right, exactly.
I mean, Peru and Colombia and those places went bonkers for a while with the Shining Path and so forth. I remember one little story here, not relates to anything, but I was on the board of directors of Cypress Minerals, which was a large company, and we built a new mine down in Peru. Right, not too far from Machu Picchu, and they flew us in on private planes and told us, "Don't go to Lima. Do not go to Lima." I was thinking about taking a trip after, but they flew us in on private plane to what's the town at Machu Picchu, the city near Machu Picchu. God, it's not coming to me. But and we had the big dedication and did a little bit of the touring. But three of the ladies, including the chairman's wife, were down in the town where we were doing shopping, and they were surrounded by a group of ladies that tried to push them into the back room to rob them. But fortunately, we had guards with them, and they scared these other ladies off. But that's what was going on down in Peru at the time, plus the so-called Shining Path. We weren't supposed to go into Lima because they afraid somebody would come after us. So you have some of that going on. But the fact of the matter is that Peru has kind of straightened out a little bit, and I've been in Chile several times. There's been a lot of, that's your big copper producing country.
Right.
So I'm not overly concerned about copper, but there's a lot of these other rare minerals that we got to watch out for.
Right. And so the industry has made cases for, there needs to be some permitting to make sure that the United States has some kind of independence in terms of supply chains, and I think that's what they're in charge of now at the AIMS lab. They're in charge of watching that.
And that's what the Bureau used to do. Watch.
Oh, is that so?
I used to have contact with CIA and everybody else when I was down there. About these kinds of things. Well, the Russians are doing this, or the Chinese are doing that.
Right.
But there's also a matter of economics. You can't just say we want to produce XYZ mineral if it's not economical too.
Right.
But at least it's there, and it's and you could produce it if you had to.
Right. Yeah. Or at least in terms of in the case of, I wish I could remember this now, but it's the new mine in northern Arizona. Other mines, it had been turned down 10 times, its application, and it's when it became part of the Defense, I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's a Natural Resources Defense Act
Council,
basically, and so it became part of it became a rider on another bill, and it allowed the permit to go through, whereas otherwise it hadn't. And so it seems to be, it's at least one way in which a particular industry can lay claim to say, we are providing necessary materials for the defense of the realm, so to speak.
Yeah, and there are people in the government who recognize that. The old Bureau of Mines guys are disappearing, but some in the Geological Survey and so forth, there are people who realize what's going on, but there are also people who oppose, any type of mineral permitting in areas that are that they think are wild areas and so forth.
Right,
So.
right, that are sensitive. So, coming into the current period, you've been out of Berwind since 2002, and since then, can you talk about how you've been active in the associations and in the industries?
Yeah, well, I stayed active actually for a couple of years in the National Mining Association, kind of as a director emeritus and stuff, and then I backed out of that. I was on the board of directors of Foot Mineral Company, which is the lithium company that was eventually acquired by Cyprus, and so I became a member of the board of directors on Cyprus. Went through all of that activity where Cyprus eventually was acquired by
Amex? Was it Amex that?
Well, they had acquired Amex.
Okay. Oh,
yeah,
Cyprus acquired
it was
Amex.
Cyprus Amex was the name of the company.
Okay. Okay. So
And
the other way.
and then it was Freeport-McMoRan that eventually ended up owning Cyprus, and I went off that board, and I stayed active, very active in SME and AIME activities, and I stayed did a very little bit of consulting for a few companies, and then I started to slow down and started to play golf, but I stayed active in AIME, and my wife passed away maybe 12, 13 years ago, kind of changed the flavor of things.
Right.
And so, here I am, 80 years old, and basically, except for this stuff, I've decided that it's time to play golf and ski. So.
Well, I did want to ask about the changes in mining industry overall. This is something I'm asking almost everyone I talk to. At the time that you were entering the mining industry, the top 10 mining companies worldwide, about half of them or more were American or based in the United States. And now I think there's one in the top 10, and the rest are Canadian, Australian, Chinese, and I think 4 are Chinese now. And so can you talk about that shift? Is that significant given that these are global operations? There's Americans working in the BHP Billiton and all of these other firms.
Well, this was a frantic period where there were so many acquisitions going on, even internally within the country. There were acquisitions going on, and coal business, and like Freeport-McMoRan acquiring Cyprus, and stuff like that was going on at a rapid pace. And these other countries were a little bit more, these other, let's say, foreign companies were a lot more aggressive, your BHP Billitons and so forth. And they decided that's where they want to put their money into the minerals, and they had their own going on. And our companies just I don't know how to say this, or I don't know why, but they just weren't as vigorous in growing as were some of these other companies that were controlled overseas. Chinese, I don't know how to explain. I do know how to explain it. They obviously have a lot of mineral resources on their own,
right?
And they got a lot of money, and they do things very quietly, and their economy is growing a lot faster than ours was, still is, and a lot faster than others. And they started to not only build their own mineral operations in their own country, but they decided, well, we're going to start to invest overseas. Our people were just we different type of economy than China, obviously.
Sure.
We got to deal with the stock market and the shareholders and all that kind of thing. So they just weren't as vigorous. Now, you mentioned Freeport-McMoRan. They do have foreign operations, and they do have big ones.
Yeah.
And some of those other companies, but some of the other ones have disappeared. U.S. Steel Mining, for example.
Right.
They don't have any coal mines anymore. They sold all their coal mines off. They hardly have any iron operations anymore. They get their iron from other people. You could probably name some others in the metal mining industry that just haven't been. They used to run the mine up in Montana has disappeared. They've just kind of Anaconda no longer exists. I don't know why. It's just a matter of the overall economics. Maybe the value of the dollar had something to do with it. I don't. There's various reasons, I guess, why this has happened. I guess maybe weren't as vigorous as we should have been. Some of our companies. And we were also having trouble getting permits and deposits to mine. You mentioned some of the ones in Arizona that you talked about before. Getting permits to mine on some of the better deposits here that took years and years and years and years of dollars to get it started.
Right. And
it's
that's
just kind of a natural evolution. That's a function of the overall world economics, function of the value of the dollar, and function of the politics of the situation.
I'm sure there's no simple answer. Some of the things I mull over in my head, in case of Anaconda, they got burned badly in Chile, and so there's perhaps a kind of, when other companies were going global aggressively, the United States had been experienced getting burned in other countries and had lost money, and perhaps there was some kind of retrenchment. And then in the case of steel, you have the decline of some of these vertically integrated enterprises. They're spinning off the coal divisions as unprofitable or as into the system, and mini mills come in and are really lean, and their feedstock is scrap metal. So 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 in a sense, the United States as a whole kind of spun off its mineral operations. For better or worse, that seems to be a kind of overly simple but a kind of overview story of what took place. What's the next? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to mention Chile, for example. You mentioned Anaconda and all, and I had been down there doing some consulting for the United Nations, believe it or not, and I was there when Chuquicamata was kind of booming, and then I was there a short time before Allende took over, right? Just a few days, actually.
Oh, really?
And I left, and then there was this, and then I went back for the United Nations, and it just happened to be a few days before Allende was deposed, but that's not the point I'm trying to raise. When I was there at the mine, and I wrote some reports on, how maybe you could do some things a little bit more efficiently. I don't know whatever happened to them, but there was these reports in the UN. But when I came back right before Allende was deposed, man, they had doctors and lawyers and everything else driving trucks up at that mine and running the shovels, and it was a freaking mess. And I wrote this in my report, how this mine was being totally operated improperly. And again, I don't want to know what happened, but then Allende it took them a long time to get back to where they are now. But the Chileans are pretty good themselves, and they used to send students up to us, to graduate students and forth.
That's right.
And but boy, the political system can really screw things up in a hurry.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to get to the bottom of that story because we have oral histories of Bob Haldeman's oral history on what happened in the case of
Yeah.
Braden Copper. Well, perhaps we could just, your reflections, your years of experience as you've been a professor of engineering, head of a department at Penn State, director of the Bureau of Mines during a critical period in the history of that institution and in U.S. history, and then several decades as chairman and CEO of Berwyn Natural Resources. So you have this wealth of experience in a number of different industries. What do you think is the trajectory of resource extraction and processing in the United States, and what could facilitate a smarter use of state resources and industrial resources? What kind of policies would you like to see implemented going forward?
Well, this is obviously partially political, right?
Sure.
Because if you get an administration in that's going to be shutting down coal plants or taking 10, 12 years to get a permit on a mine operation somewhere, it's going to hurt in the long run. It's hurting now. So I would say that the overall governmental policy on minerals has got to improve. I don't know whether we'll ever get to the point where we were the world star, because you have China that probably is half unexplored now, and got Russia, but they have their own problems, with the political systems they have.
Sure.
I think that the technology, despite the fact that there is no Bureau of Mines to help boost it, has definitely been improving. When you go out on this floor for this convention that we're at, you will see some of the things that companies are coming up with. It would be nice if the government would support more research, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. Even if administrations change and a real pro-mining administration gets in there, you'll get a little bit more research. But I don't think you're going to get back to the Bureau of Mines days, where the Bureau of Mines was kind of pushing things, and
right.
I don't think that's going to happen for quite some time.
Right.
But you have to have a positive attitude in Washington, and the people who are running the government, both in the Congress and the administration, have got to realize how important this mineral situation is to our country, not only from an economic standpoint, but from a military and overall strategic standpoint. Because you've got wild people in the world these days that are doing crazy things, and some of those crazy things are happening in areas where you have energy and mineral resources. Right. And you have no control over that, so you got to keep control over what's going on here. So I think that I don't know. You're not. I doubt that you're going to, not in the very near future. I doubt that you're going to have a clear mineral policy, but I think you're going to have a shift on the part of Washington, and in some cases some of the states. But right. Some of the states are glad to have plants and operations, moving plants down to Alabama and so forth from states that aren't as, for various reasons, aren't as
pro-mineral.
Yeah. So I think that a little bit more pro-mineral attitude on the part of the Congress and the administration is extremely important for us. And I don't know what's going to happen in the Mideast, and I don't know what's going to happen with crazies like Putin over there that want to control the world.
Right. Was it better during the Bush administration or Bush 2, I mean. The Bureau of Mines did not come back, for example.
No.
But was there a shift in policy towards maybe permitting or
Well,
research?
I think there was a definite help at the time. Of course, they were all wrapped up in Iraq at the time too.
Right.
But it is usually always better under a Republican administration. Although there've been some good Democrat mineral types like Lyndon Johnson and so forth that were pretty pro mineral.
Right.
Now, what's going to happen next? I don't know. I don't know who's going to be the president.
Right. Well, this is oral history, so we will refrain from the crystal ball strategy. But it's been good to have your perspective on where we've been and where things might go next. Dr. Falkie, I want to thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate your taking the time to speak with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure recalling some of this stuff, and I appreciate it.
Wonderful.